Dr. Jetty is a professor of health policy and management at Boston University School of Public Health, where he directs the Boston Rehabilitation Outcome Measurement Center. He's also the director of the New England Regional Spinal Cord Injury Center. He serves on the executive committee for the Claude Pepper Older Americans Independence Center. Dr. Jetty served as the chairperson for the IOM Committee on the Future of Disability in America report. And in 2013, we can congratulate Dr. Jetty for being elected as a member of the Institute of Medicine at the National Academy of Sciences. So welcome, Dr. Jetty, and Dr. Jetty is going to be presenting to you on patient-reported outcomes.
Thanks, Mary. So my assignment is to talk about patient-reported outcomes, and I appreciate Nancy setting the stage for me so I can contrast some of what she talked about when we talk about patient-reported outcomes. Very basic definition of what PROs are. They represent the patient's perspective, both of their condition and the impact of, in this case, arthritis on their lives and different dimensions of their lives. Now, I've been doing research on outcome measurement for a long time, longer than I'd like to recall. I've been doing this kind of work since the 1970s, and I began my work as a doctoral student in arthritis. My dissertation was on developing and validating a tool for looking at functional outcomes in rheumatoid arthritis. And let me tell you, for starters, the world of PRO measurement is extremely different today than it was back in the 1970s. And the methodology available to us is far more sophisticated and allows us to come up with much superior measures than we could back in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. So part of my goal today is to share with you some of what I see as some of the exciting developments in PRO methodology. So how are PROs being used? They're being very widely used in research today in and outside of arthritis. They're being used in clinical work, observational research, comparative effectiveness research, health services, and health policy research. They're being used in our clinical research as primary, secondary, and exploratory outcome measures. In observational research, as David was describing the two large arthritis cohort studies that are currently available, PROs are heavily invested in those studies as predictors, as mediators, and as outcome variables. Increasingly in comparative effectiveness research, we're seeing PROs used to look at the relative utility of different clinical approaches. And in health services research, we're looking and comparing at health outcomes of patients treated under different healthcare delivery systems, different kinds of provider groups, different structures. And then finally in health policy research, we're seeing PROs used increasingly. So PROs are here to stay. Now, my background is as a physical therapist, so I'm very aware of the culture in my field where we're very suspect about PROs. Even though we tend to use them, we tend to use them kicking and screaming. For some reason, we are very suspicious about the perspective of the patient when it comes to evaluating the impact of the care that we're provided. But from my view, they provide critical information about the impact on the lives of individuals that frequently is not available in other modes of measurement. Now, building on what Nancy was saying, if you're picking an instrument, there are three things in my view that I really focus on when I'm launching a study of one type or another and thinking about what type of measure to use. The first one, and Nancy did a very nice job of illustrating the importance here, is conceptual clarity. This step is frequently missed, I find, in consulting with clinical researchers. They tend to grab what's most frequently used, or they go to various professional organizations who recommend certain metrics, but they don't give enough thought to whether or not it's really focusing in on the outcome that you're trying to say something about, either influence or to really understand. I think this is critical. Now, unlike psychometric adequacy, there's no coefficient that's going to tell you what concept it is that you should be trying to focus on. That's up to the judgment of the investigator. But I think it's a critical step. And it's a step that many times will lead you into the the area of patient-reported outcomes, because many times what we're interested in understanding is the impact of arthritis and our interventions with patients with arthritis on their lives. And many times you can't get at those important dimensions in other ways. And so, although sometimes kicking and screaming, you end up in the realm of patient-reported outcomes. So conceptual clarity. Now, the ICF framework, I'm not going to say much about it because Nancy nicely reviewed it. I think it's very helpful to all of us as investigators to really think through what are the concepts that we're really trying to say something about in our research. Are we focused on body function and structure? Are we looking at activities and activity limitations? Or in fact, are we interested in participation outcomes? And so if we're focused on body functions or impairments, we're looking at the physiologic impact on body systems or organ systems. When we're focused on activity, we're in fact looking at individual tasks and whether or not we can execute those in various ways. And that really puts us in the mainstream of performance-based measures. And then finally, participation and restriction in our participation. Very difficult to get at that using performance-based measures. Instrumented measures that Dr. Bonato will talk about are increasingly giving us means to look at that as well. But here we're interested in focusing on the nature and the extent of a person's involvement in their life, roles of their lives. So first and foremost. And then as Nancy showed us, there are many different dimensions of activity and participation that we should be thinking about when we're picking outcomes that we're focusing on in our research. Is our intervention focused on learning and applying knowledge, general tasks, communication, movement, self-care, domestic life activities, roles, interpersonal interactions, major life arenas, community, social, and civic lives? All of these areas can and have been measured, but they're extremely challenging. But I would argue increasingly important to the lives of individuals with various forms of arthritis and who are undergoing various forms of intervention. And I'm excited that some of the speakers tomorrow will be focusing on some of the cutting-edge research that's being done in that arena, which I look forward to hearing more about. I'm not going to spend really any time on psychometric adequacy. It's really well addressed in the literature. And if you're interested, take a look at the literature. It really helps us get a handle on what are the most psychometrically useful tools available out there once we've figured out what it is we're trying to in fact measure. Obviously, these tools need to have acceptable levels of reliability and validity. There's a rich literature looking at that. In addition, for many types of research questions that you will be asking, you have to be interested also in their ability to detect change and their ability to detect clinically relevant change, both sensitivity and responsiveness. So from a psychometric point of view, what you have to be struggling with is, are they sufficiently reliable? Do they have sufficient validity? And do they provide me with the kind of metric to detect both sensitivity to change and responsiveness? Now, the psychometrics of PRO measures have improved greatly in the past several decades. The development of measures has become increasingly formal and science-based. Back in the 1970s, that was not the case. Most of the measures, PRO measures, came out of clinical practice and clinical experience. We pulled a bunch of items together. They seemed relevant to the lives of our patients. We put them into an instrument. People started using them. And before you know it, they became gold standards. And a lot of the ones that you'll have to compare your measures against are those measures. They've been around for a long time, and God forbid anyone attack them. What we're also seeing with current measures is there are much better links between concepts and PRO measures. This has driven me crazy for many years now. Many existing PRO measures are a mishmash of looking at body structure and function, activity and participation, all wrapped up in one coefficient that we then produce and try to say something about the impact of arthritis on the lives of our patients. It's impossible to look at the relationship between body function, activity, and participation if our measures throw them all into one metric. It seems so obvious, but I could show you example after example where those are the measures that we're currently using out there. So the linkage between concepts and the measures themselves has become far more focused in the more contemporary measures. There's much better qualitative work that's being done in developing PRO measures. Focus groups with patients, as well as focus groups with clinicians, making sure that we have the content validity to cover the areas that we're trying to say something about. And these methods are well established now, and they're well set forth. And if your measures don't follow those approaches, you're going to have trouble really getting them accepted in the literature today. And then ePRO methods are increasingly becoming available, which makes it much more accessible to use. So the psychometrics have improved greatly. Now, the NIH has invested, now much to their credit, I must say, I have criticized the NIH for many years, for many things, but of late, they have invested heavily into the improved measurement and metrics that are so critically necessary, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that at the end of my remarks, but they really have. They've spent millions of dollars to improve the metrics that are available to us today in looking at important outcomes both in arthritis and outside of arthritis. So in the time I have available, I was trying to think, you know, how am I going to cover this topic? And so the answer is you can't cover this topic. But I wanted to kind of give you an overview, which I've just done. I wanted to give you a taste of PROs that are being used in arthritis. And I decided that I would do that with a systematic review that was published in the Journal of Rehabilitation Medicine, and I think it was 2000. It's volume 32. It covers a lot of the very common measures that are PRO measures that are used in arthritis. The WOMAC, the OKS, the OHS, the KOOS, the HAC, the WHOOS, the LAI, the AIMS. It's a world full of acronyms. And over on the far right, I want to call your attention to the number of items in many of these tools. They're quite extensive, you know, anywhere from in the 40s, the 20s, a lot of items in many of these tools. And I also want to call your attention to the kinds of concepts that are being addressed in these measures. A lot of them, for example, the WOMAC, pain, physical function, stiffness, and so forth. So this is kind of a highlight of some of the most common PROs that are used in arthritis today. The reason I want to emphasize this, though, is I want to show you the breadth of concepts that are covered in these PROs. They're listed over here on the columns here, and then the plus marks indicate that the particular PRO is measuring that concept. So some of these PROs are in fact touching on body structure. Many of them focus on different body functions. And then in the area of activity and participation, they cover a wide array of different activities and participation that may be relevant to the lives of individuals with arthritis. So you can get a sense that there's quite a breadth, and it cuts across a lot of the different measures that are being used out there today. Now, I talked a lot about the improved methods, and I want to talk a bit more about that in the final minutes that I have available with you. And I want to, in particular, contrast the methods that I was taught back in the 1970s with the more contemporary methods that are being increasingly used in developing and refining PRO measures being used both inside and outside of arthritis. Now, classical tests, like all the ones that I've just shown you on that systematic review, they were widely used for many decades in developing outcome measures. They consist of a fixed set of items, and I showed you the number of items in many of those tools as part of the outcome instrument. And once you pick that tool and go to use it in a particular study, you present all the items to either a clinician or to a patient. You get a response, and then you score the responses to come up with a metric for each of those instruments. That's the classical test approach. Scores are typically summed across all items. Sometimes you take an average, and observed scores on the instrument consist of both true score plus error, and we're always trying to maximize true score, minimize measurement error. That's classical test theory. In contrast, more contemporary measurement methods, in particular item response theory methods, come at the measurement of PRO concepts quite differently. The health outcome scores that you look at in contemporary IRT methods are item-based. They're not test-based. The instrument items, each of them it's modeled as a function of the person's level of function or whatever outcome and the characteristics of each functional item that's completed. The functional scores that you generate using contemporary methods are based on the probability models that represent the likelihood that a person would give a specific response to a particular item given their level of the outcome. Scores are calibrated to an interval score. Typically, we use the Logit score, and standardized to a t-scale where the mean is 50 and a standard deviation are plus or minus 10. So we can actually develop interval levels of scores using these kinds of methods, and it enables outcome scores to be linked on an underlying outcome scale. So contemporary methods, item response theory. Now there are several advantages when you compare and contrast the classical approach to developing PROs in item response theory. Precision is fixed for all scores on the classical test, like the WOMAC. The longer the scale will increase the reliability, and one of the reasons a lot of PROs are long with many items is that we do that in order to improve our reliability. It does have a problem handling mixed item response formats, so you pretty much have to stay with one item response format. If it's degree of assistance or degree of difficulty or degree of pain, if you're going to develop a scale or an instrument using classical test theory, you have to stay with one response format. Now, in contrast with item response theory, you can look at the precision of your metric at various levels of the outcome that you're trying to measure. And typically, in the middle of the distribution, your precision is probably at its maximum, and at the extremes, you begin to lose precision. And so you can really look at precision in a more careful manner. You can use mixed item formats as long as you can calibrate them on an underlying scale of the outcome that you're trying to measure. You can mix measures of dependence with difficulty and with pain as long as they load on the same underlying trait, and different scales can be placed on a common metric. One of the big advantages of IRT-based approaches is that it doesn't require that everyone respond to all of the items in an instrument. Some of the instruments that I have developed, for example, have over 100 items in the scale. No one would ever use a 100-item instrument. But using techniques such as computer adaptive test administration, you can administer a small subset of the items in the underlying IRT-based scale and get an accurate and highly precise estimate of the score that you would have gotten if you had used all of the items in the scale. So it's highly efficient, and you can save a lot of time without sacrificing a lot of precision or accuracy. And you don't need to ask people about items that are really irrelevant or nonsensical. Some of the classical test instruments ask people who are in wheelchairs about whether or not they can walk a mile, for example, which makes no sense. And you don't need to do that once you're using an IRT-based test and you start using computer adaptive techniques. So you can tailor a scale to each individual that you're assessing, and yet you're able to develop a metric, a score, that can be compared across individuals in a sample or across samples. And the items using these computer adaptive administration techniques are chosen from a large underlying item bank that one has calibrated. And these IRT item banks provide the foundation for computer adaptive testing. So the combination of IRT and CAT, I think, really provides some very useful advancement in PRO measurement. You're allowed to select questions on the basis of how people respond to previous items that you've administered. And so you can very quickly adapt the questions that are being asked to the individual. You can skip uninformative items, and so you can program the methodology so that if someone is using adaptive devices, for example, say after a joint replacement, you will ask questions about functions using adaptive devices. If they're not using adaptive devices, all of those items are not available for selection into the pool. It allows determination of a person's standing on a domain without a loss of measurement precision. And there have been a lot of studies that have shown the precision is quite high when you use computer adaptive administrative techniques as compared to asking all of the items in these types of scales. So highly efficient, the small sample of items instead of using all of them. The other advantage is you as the investigator, you can decide what kind of precision you want, and you can set that in advance. It uses different types of hardware and software platforms, so it's highly flexible. It minimizes data collection burden and cost, and the data, the scores, are immediately available to the user. So I wanted to review some of this with you because I thought it would be of interest as you think about PROs that you might want to be using in your work in arthritis. And I just want to end by talking about one of the largest initiatives in improving PROs available in health research, and that is the initiative called PROMIS, Patient-Reported Outcome Measurement Information System. This is a major effort that the NIH has invested in over the past 10 years to develop much more dynamic tools using contemporary measurement techniques to look at health outcomes from the patient perspective. And we're going to be seeing increasing use of PROMIS both inside the field of rheumatology and outside in looking at the patient perspective and outcomes of various healthcare. The vision of PROMIS was to provide clinicians and researchers access to outcome tools that would be efficient, precise, valid, and responsive, both for adults and child-reported measures of health and well-being. And the PROMIS initiative has been going on, I think, for 8 or 9 years, and it's using science to create state-of-the-art PRO outcome measures. The initial target has been focused on physical function, pain, fatigue, social function, and emotional distress. And as you can see, these types of outcomes could be extremely relevant to the kinds of work that you're doing in rheumatology. The items in each of the banks are illustrated in this column here, and as you can see, it ranges from 12 or 16, for example, in the area of satisfaction or sleep disturbance, to a high of 125 in the area of physical function. So the pools vary widely. There are 2 ways in which you can develop instruments from each of these item pools. You can develop short forms in advance. You can select a subset of items from the pool and develop a classical paper and pencil test and administer that, or you can use computer adaptive techniques and let the computer algorithms decide which items to select for individual patients that you're working with. One of the real nice features of the PROMIS initiative is that there's an assessment technology center that's available on the web. The site here is listed down here for you. It's a free online research management tool. It enables study-specific websites to be set up for secure data capture using PROMIS instruments. The clinical studies can be customized. It includes the PROMIS instruments, both short forms and CATs, and detailed statistical and development history is available on all of the PROMIS instruments, and it allows for real-time scoring. It's a very useful tool. It's a resource that we've used in our research. I don't want to paint too rosy a picture, however. It can be a challenging website to use. If you want more information about some of the challenges, we can talk later, but it's still an extremely valuable and useful resource. However, condition-specific tools have not gone out of business. Many of us are still trying to improve upon the development of new metrics that are tailored to specific patient populations. And then in closing, I just want to mention one that we developed at Boston University called the OA-CAT, which was specifically developed for individuals with lower extremity arthritis. And the OA-CAT focuses on 3 different outcome dimensions. It looks at functional pain, and we have 140 tasks in the functional pain domain. We have a functional difficulty domain in which we have 140 functional tasks. And then finally, in the participation domain, we have 35 social roles. We developed these instruments using IRT techniques, and they can be administered using computer adaptive testing. And it's an area of ongoing investigation that we and others are pursuing. Let me leave it there, and thank you for your time and your attention.
Alan, as far as, for example, with Promise, is it to the point that now is with, a phone app where a patient could go ahead and with their phone, be able to go ahead and have an app and that be uploaded? I mean, have we gotten to that point, or is that really where you're going? Because I saw, that obviously technology is going to be important, and, computers now are, now it's all phone apps, but.
You can do phone administration of the Promise tools, yes. Okay. You can set up these kinds of instruments however you want to do data collection. And we've done data collection using IRT-based tools, phone, face-to-face, with a structured interview, as well as self-administered over the internet. It's very, very flexible. These tools are very flexible in the ways in which they can be set up and administered.
Hi, thanks a lot. My name is Arif Jetha, and I had a quick question, because I work with a lot of young adults with different rheumatic diseases, and when I was putting together a research project, I realized that there wasn't too many studies showing psychometric validity or reliability of different measures that have typically been conducted with general adult samples. So do you have any recommendations, just say if I continue that area of research, like to select measures for this kind of niche population?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned it. We at Boston University with David Tulsky, who's now at NYU, are a Promise site. And the focus of our site has been on evaluating the tools, both Promise and outside of Promise, developed for children and adolescents. And so I can give you examples of some of the tools that we've been looking at. The Shrine Hospital Network and MJ Mulcahy in particular have developed a quite an extensive battery of tools specifically designed for kids with major impairing illnesses. And so if I were looking for tools that might fit in a adolescent or child population, that's where I would probably begin. I would also look at the child tools in the Promise network. But what we're finding in some of our research is that with kids with major functionally limiting illness, some of the more condition-specific tools seem to be working better than the more broad-based Promise tools. So that's where I would look. Okay, thank you very much.